unSILOed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.
Welcome to unSILOed. This is Greg LeBlanc, and I'm here today with Daryl Fairweather, who is the chief economist at Redfin and also the author of this new book called Hate the Game: Economic Cheat Codes for Life, Love, and Work. Welcome, Daryl.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So the title of the book is puzzling. I think you explained it at the end, right? Because it says, hate the game. But in a way, when I read this book, you seem like someone who actually kind of loves the game, right? And loves looking at everything like a game. And I think that, the book is really intended as a practical guide to life and love and work, using concepts from economics, particularly game theory and behavioral economics. And I think you said at the beginning of the book that you were inspired by Steve Levitt, right? Who you read right before you went off to undergrad. And it seems like that moment when you were 17 years old dictated, right, led inevitably to the creation of this book. But Steve Levitt is really, his books are more about understanding the world. And I think yours is really more about putting that understanding to practical use. So, maybe just tell us, why did you write this book? Did you decide, at some point earlier on, you're like, yeah, one of these days I'm going to write a book like this?
Yeah, I had the idea to write this book when I first got into the private sector after graduate school, because most of my experience was in graduate school learning economics, and I was thrown into the real world. And I found myself relying on the things I learned in grad school quite a lot, more so than business books. Like I had read Lean In and Never Split the Difference, but I didn't really find those books all that useful
Mm.
compared to what I had learned in game theory and behavioral economics, labor economics, and for the housing market, like navigating where to live and how to pay for it, housing economics plays into that. So as I was realizing that I was relying on this information, I had the idea to spread it with as many people as possible, and that was kind of the first genesis. But it wasn't until maybe 10 years later that I actually started to sit down and write it. I had to get more experience to actually fill in the entire book.
hmm I mean, did it take some effort to figure out how to write in such an accessible style? Because, that's not how economists are taught to write.
Well, my career as chief economist of Redfin, I talk to regular people all the time. I talk to journalists quite a lot for my
hmm
job. We do housing market research at Redfin, and with the purpose of sharing it with the world. We want our customers to see it, and the way that our customers oftentimes see it is they read about it in newspapers. So I'm talking to journalists all the time, and journalists are quite intelligent. I mean, they're smart people, but they don't have the economics coursework. So I had to learn how to speak to them in ways that they understood, and I think that training allowed me to write a book that was accessible to everyday people who are curious intellectually but don't have the foundation in economics.
Now, I think there have been some studies that show that economists behave differently. People who are trained in economics, they behave differently, and everyone's puzzled. Is this selection? Is this treatment? Right? I mean, are economists already kind of wired that way? I mean, do you think that exposure to economics changes the way people interact? I mean, if you know that you're playing the game and you have some notion of the models and you know what a hawk and dove game is, and you look forward and reason back in formal models. Does this actually change the way people behave in their ordinary lives?
I think it does, because a lot of times when I'm talking to my friends and they're in some kind of life dilemma or career dilemma, they get stuck in
Mm.
trying to figure out what the correct decision is. And I think economics provides a really useful framework for making decisions. We have utility theory, right? So you just go with the decision that has the higher expected utility. And I don't think many people think about decisions that way. They get caught up in things like sunk cost fallacies or status quo bias. So having that understanding of both economics and the behavioral part, incorporating the psychology into it, I think allows me, and I think a lot of other, hopefully more people who read the book, to feel more confident in the decisions. I think a lot of people know what the right decision is, but they don't really have the confidence to make it because they're not really thinking through it in terms of what will maximize my utility.
Yeah, because I mean, it seems like there are some people that are really, really good at playing the game, like the employment game, without any knowledge of game theory or whatever. They seem to have an intuitive understanding of how to succeed and like what the rules are and so forth. Um, and usually if you look at the economists, I mean, the economists are also oftentimes kind of clueless, when it comes to navigating, say, the corporate world, because they sort of start with the assumption that these organizations are run in sensible ways, right?
Yeah, I think that some people just have a natural intuition, although I find that those people have some familiarity with game theory. I was just talking to somebody who said that my book reminded him of The Art of War, which is, an
Yeah.
ancient text. And I was explaining that The Art of War really is a game theory book. I mean, they didn't have the models back then, or they weren't using the same terminology of a Nash equilibrium, but a lot of the same lessons in that are the lessons that you find in game theory or behavioral game theory. And then I think economists might not be that great at navigating the real world because they don't spend that much time in it. I'm sure that they are
Mhm.
very like, the most accomplished economists know how to navigate the world of publishing or the world of tenure, but they just aren't that familiar with the corporate world to, maybe understand how their theories apply there in practice.
Mhm. Now you talk about your first job out of a PhD program,
Mhm.
and it wasn't a very fulfilling job for you, and you made a choice which ultimately turned out not to be in alignment with your utility, right, to speak. And it seems like a lot of people make decisions like that. Like they prioritize things like money, and they don't really know like what makes them happy. Why do you suppose that is? I mean, is because it seems like you can't really compute what to do if you don't have a good sense of what is going on, you know, underneath, like what really makes you happy and so forth. I mean, does economics need to be supplemented with a little bit of psychology?
That's definitely my point of view. When I was in graduate school, I specialized in behavioral economics. So that was like the in addition to all the core courses economics, I took many courses just specialized in behavioral economics because I feel like economics doesn't really get you 100% there in terms of understanding why people make the decisions that they do. And those decisions are fundamental to what prices are or to what supply and demand are. So I think if you really want to get down to the core of it, having some psychology is useful. I might upset some psychologists here, but I think economics is a better or more useful framework than psychology. I like the way that behavioral economics like incorporates psychological concepts, but then still uses the same utility theory or game theory fundamentals. Because the reason I didn't become a psychologist, for example, is that there was too much memorization. It felt too arbitrary. It felt too much like taxonomy than getting to some universal theory. So that's why I really like behavioral economics because you get that universal theory, but with some understanding that people are complex and that they don't always behave rationally, but trying to understand why they make irrational decisions when they do.
Mhm. And when you worked at the big tech company, right,
Mhm.
you were, doing a lot of stuff on, kind of workplace satisfaction and its relationship to productivity and so forth. And, I mean, what did you learn there? Because it seems like an organization that's really, really concerned with productivity is gonna take a real deep interest in understanding, right, what's going on in the workplace. But so many organizations don't, right? So many organizations just prioritize superficial metrics and they don't really, you know, do a deep dive into what's going on in the workplace. How do we explain that?
Well, I think this company that I was working at, they were kind of forced into a corner and needed to do that. There was this big expose on them in a national newspaper about how awful their work culture was. And they're also having problems with attrition, people quitting the job, which is expensive, right? If people keep quitting and you have to keep retraining them, then you're spending more money on recruiting people and training them than it would have cost to just retain them. So what I found really interesting about that job is that I think the leaders already intuitively knew what needed to be done, but they also needed a data justification, a link to performance that would go into their bottom line to justify the correct things to do. Because I don't think it really takes an economist to point out that, you should provide career opportunities to your employees and allow them to give feedback on their leaders and make them feel valued through recognition. Like these are things that have been studied time and time again. But at this particular company, they were very data driven. And it was my job to really hone in and improve essentially that these programs that improved employee engagement were also improving performance and therefore impacting the bottom line. So, yeah, but it didn't take a lot of convincing once I had the data because I think the prior was already there that they needed to do something because employees were unhappy and it was affecting their ability to keep them.
Now, as chief economist, I mean, this is a role that I don't even think this existed, maybe 20 years ago or 10 or 15 years ago. It's kind of a new role. And, your old professor, John List, was chief economist. Oh, he wasn't full time, he was part time. And I have a lot of colleagues who will work, either one day a week or they'll take a year off and go work for eBay or, Amazon or Google or Yahoo. And I guess Hal Varian was kind of the
Mhm.
the first. He was like the pioneer, right?
Yes.
By becoming chief economist at Google. So why is it that organizations need, whether it's like a full-time chief economist or like importing these economists into their daily operations? What do they add? And, should we have more of them?
Well, these tech companies and, like, all companies are essentially tech companies now. It's kind of, it doesn't really mean
Yeah.
anything anymore, but they have tons of data, and they have people who are data engineers or data scientists, maybe they're trained in statistics, but you really need somebody who understands how to put context to the data in
Hmm.
order to come up with judgments about what to do based on that data. And I think that's where economists really shine, is not just presenting the data or finding correlations, they can get to causality. And if you can understand causality, then you can say, well, making this change will result in this result. And that's what businesses need. They don't, like, just having the data isn't enough. What they want to know how to leverage it to make better business decisions. And I think that's where economists can really shine with their training in causal approaches, or forecasting. That's another big thing that economists do within organizations. So it's not surprising to me that's become more popular. Uh, I find that on my team at Redfin, the economists are always getting pulled into different
Mm.
teams, different problems where the data exists, but the, like, question of what to do about it is still unanswered, or a question about, well, will this solution really work? Like, is it externally valid? Will it work
Mhm.
next year? Will it work in these different markets? That's where I think economists can really add a lot of value.
So it's not just analyzing data, but it's also kind of designing experiments that'll tease out, right, causation.
Sometimes it's experiments, but I find that experiments are actually pretty rare
Mm.
in the private sector, because experiments are costly. Like,
Mm.
businesses like to make decisions as soon as they have, at least a good amount of evidence that it's the right thing to do. They don't want to wait, because waiting can be very costly. So oftentimes it's more actually that Steve Levitt approach of finding natural experiments, or finding or doing, like, matching analyses, those kinds of things to get closer to causality without doing a full-blown
Mhm.
experiment. I've been lucky that I got brought into a really cool experiment at Redfin that was on all of our users, all of our millions and millions of users. That was pretty cool, but that's pretty rare. I think, most of the time what we're doing is more of that Freakonomics kind of causal analysis.
Now, when you're in the PhD program, I mean, did they have a career track that was outside of academia? Because I find that most of the PhD students that I know, like, it's basically academia or bust. And then when the academia thing doesn't work out or they realize they don't want to do it, they're kind of on their own when it comes to, navigating the job market. Do you think that, I mean, given the only a small percentage of our PhD students actually turn out to be tenured academics, should we be spending more time kind of coaching them on getting these other types of positions?
Yeah, when I was in graduate school, there wasn't really any, support for going into private sector. I mean, there was the regular job market, and consulting recruited heavily
Mhm,
from
yeah,
economics departments. That's how I got my very first job that I
like
ended up not
litigation
liking. Yeah,
consulting.
litigation consulting is a big one. So, which is fine. I think that I learned a lot doing litigation consulting. It's a very professional career, which means that, like, you have to learn how to be a professional in that career. So if you go into that world, they're going to teach you how to write an email. They'll teach you how to talk to clients. They'll teach you how to present yourself in this way that, like, basically how lawyers present themselves. And then when I went over into tech, I found tech to be way more relaxed. Not really this culture of writing pristine emails, or talking in certain ways. It was just more relaxed, more like grad school. But I'm glad that I had that experience in consulting, because I was able to carry those professional skills on with me. Whereas I think some of the economists who went straight into tech struggled a bit more with, like, well, how do I talk to my manager? Or how do I write an email to the vice president telling him about the results? Like, or her about the results. I think, those professional skills, are needed. And this big tech company I went to, they did have a lot of, um, like learning modules that you could sign up for that were free. It was actually really great. It was like getting a free MBA while I was working for them. I signed up for as many of these professional courses as I could. So yeah, if you go to the right private sector company, I think that they will train you. But it can be, I think where a lot of PhDs make a mistake is they don't really understand how valuable they are, and they get stuck in
Mm.
the first job that they went to straight out of grad school, not realizing how many other opportunities there are that where they could earn just as much money or maybe even more money and have even broader opportunities, but they just kind of like stay put because they don't see that broader world around them.
So consulting's kind of like a postdoc in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, yeah, they're very good at taking PhD students and turning them into professionals, but then they get the benefit that most of those people hang on for a very long time and don't really go and look at what their other opportunities are. Because I think if they did, they would see that they would be very valued outside of just consulting.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of the book is all about kind of the inside option
Mhm.
versus the outside option and like, really trying to understand what your true value is, whether it's in, relationships or in employment setting and so forth. And, it is a difficult thing to figure out. Why is it that people, have such a poor understanding, they either overestimate or underestimate their true value? I mean, how much time should you set aside for just kind of price discovery, right, in your life?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is uncertainty aversion. There's this famous experiment in behavioral economics where if you give a person two options to pick a ball out of an of a urn or a sack, and you tell them that one sack is split 50-50, half black, half red balls, but the other bag has some mixture and it's some undetermined mixture. You don't get any information. They'll oftentimes choose the one where the odds are known, even though the unknown bag, like if you know absolutely nothing about whether it's 100% black, 100% red, or some mixture, it's still 50-50 odds, right? Because you don't know anything about whether there are more black or more red balls in it. But people still prefer to go with the situation where the odds are known. And I think that explains, at least partially, why people stay in jobs for longer is because at least they know that environment. At least they know what the probability is that they'll get promoted or the probability that they'll get a raise. Whereas if they go out into the rest of the world, the odds, I mean, not knowing anything, the odds are probably just as good if you just pick some other company at random that you would have just as much of a chance at getting promoted there. But people don't really want to take on that risk. But I think especially for people early in their career, you should bounce around from jobs. I know it's kind of like a little bit shame. That's what millennials do. They don't stay at a job for more than 2 years. But I think that you should not stay at your first job out of college or grad school for more than 2 years. I think you should move on at that point and then see what else is out there, and then at least you have something, a point of comparison for your next job that you need to be treated at least as well, or you'll go back to your old career track, or you'll find something else. I think the more exploration you do, the more knowledge you have about what opportunities are out there and the better off you'll be, especially early in your career where there are so many different trajectories that you take. Now that I'm a little farther around along in my career, there's a bit of, like, a weird narrowing that happens where, like, people know me as being the chief economist of Redfin, so it would be harder to, like, switch to doing something completely different from that, although I did write a book, which is kind of completely different, but I think that that the people kind of put you in a box the later you get in your career, so when you're early, you should try to explore a lot of different boxes before you confine yourself to just one.
Yeah, another thing that's puzzling to me is why, if some people want to get ahead in their career within a particular company, they benefit from leaving the company
Mhm.
and then coming back, right? I mean, why do the internal labor markets kind of, operate under different rules than the external labor markets?
I think employers take advantage of that status quo bias where they
Mm.
treat their current employees worse than new hires in terms of how much they pay them or what their level is or title is. Uh, I think maybe they have some kind of bias where they hired them at a certain level. So, like, anything above that is extra. And they don't judge them the same way that they would judge a new hire who's fresh. So, yeah, I think a lot of people do have that slingshot where they leave the company, come back, and come back at a higher title. Like, right after I left this tech company, it wasn't right after, maybe like a year after, I was getting recruited back at a higher position. And I know if I had stayed, it would have taken a really long time to go through a really brutal promotion process to get there. But the the, uh the hoops they make you jump through, I think, are a little bit more straightforward when you're a new hire versus when you're already at the company, and promotions are oftentimes very scarce because they don't think you're gonna quit. I don't think they think that they just have you and you'll stay there and the promotion is just like a bonus, but not necessary. Whereas if you're coming in, they need to convince you to make a leap of faith and join them. So they have to really bring it in terms of whatever they're offering.
Mhm. Now, a lot of your work is on bias in the workplace, and you know, Gary Becker, famously created a model where this stuff should disappear, right?
Mhm.
But it hasn't completely disappeared. How do we explain this? I mean, is part of it sort of just taking advantage, in a rational way, or is it, um, or do we still have sloppy thinking and you know bad management? I mean, how do we explain this?
Yeah, well, one thing that Becker's model missed, and I'm forgetting the name of the economist who discovered this, so it's cited in my book, but I didn't discover this, so a different economist did. What he missed was that it's not just that employers discriminate against certain groups because they dislike them. They give preferential treatment to certain groups that they do like. And when
Mm,
you just make that one little change in the model, you can have perpetuated bias. Because, say, if you give your friend a job and then that friend is now in a position to hire more of their friends, then it can perpetuate where people keep hiring their friends over and over and
yeah.
over again, even when there are other people who may be more qualified or who could work for less money. It's just a little bit of a nuance there, but I think we've seen like in the last several decades that bias persists, and I think that a lot of the times people don't even realize they have this unconscious bias because they feel like it's a good thing to give your friend
So it's just
a
homophily,
job.
right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Or to give somebody from the same school as you. That's another type of homophily, uh, preferential treatment. And but people are the networks that we form with one another, we tend to form with people who are similar to us. So that's how that kind of bias can persist.
Right, and I think you talk about how, if you are, say, a woman or underrepresented minority, if you have more of your kind, right, in an organization, then, all of you do better, right?
Yes.
And why is that? I mean, is that just mainly about support, psychological support, or is it more that you have allies that can kind of, pull levers for you?
There's some research about graduate students specifically and how women who are in cohorts where there are more women have a higher likelihood of graduating. Um,
Mhm.
one one avenue for that is in study group formation. When they asked male students, like, who they would prefer to be in study groups with, they said other male students over the female students, even when the female students had better performance in class, and they even rated the female students as having lower performance even when in actuality they had higher performance. So I think one avenue is through, like, the social groups that form and how study
Mm.
groups form, because I think a lot of learning happens just peer to peer, not peer to teacher. But there are ways to counteract that by like setting up study groups within the classroom and making sure that no one's left out, or just admitting more women, because I think some of it does come through in other ways, like sharing information about how to navigate graduate school or how to navigate workplaces. A lot of that time it's shared through these friendships in school or in the workplace. And if you're a loner because nobody really wants to hang out with you, or they're hanging out with other people that they are more familiar with or more similar to, then that can put you at a disadvantage.
Well, I mean, would that suggest that say, all-female study group would be an advantage? I mean, if because then you have more support, or do we wanna sort of, mix these groups up? I mean, one thing I've noticed in my MBA students in the last, 10 years is that the study groups have become more and more homogeneous, um, by the standard demographic criteria. So, it used to be that you would have male and female groups and black and white groups. And now, it's much more common for you to see sort of an all, black male group or an all, Asian female group. And so, oftentimes allowing people to form their own groups leads to more homogeneity. But that seems to be more true now than before.
So in my personal experience, I think that it study groups tend to be more cohesive, like when the students choose them for themselves, like they kind of know which students are going to
Yeah.
be able to work with better. But when you have a group of students that lacks diversity, so there isn't like a critical mass of Black students to form a study group together, or female students to form a study group together, that puts them at an even larger disadvantage. And I think then it would be better to have an intervention where like study groups are assigned randomly, so at least everyone has a study group, or at least everyone's on equal footing. But I think that yeah, that phenomenon of students linking up with students who are similar to them is natural in a sense. Like people are just attracted to people who are similar to them, but it only becomes a disadvantage when you're in the minority. When I was at MIT, I talk about this in the book. I attended a summer program before freshman year for underrepresented minority students. It wasn't all underrepresented minority students, like white students could apply to, and we had a couple of white students as well. But what happened when I was in the summer program is that I made all these friends, and then freshman year I already had people that I could do problem sets with and that I could, link up with and find out like where office hours were, go to office hours with them. I think if I had started with not knowing anybody, it would have been a lot more difficult. And MIT has these like pre-summer programs based on different affinities too. Like they had a group for hikers and a group for people who wanted to
Mm.
volunteer, and there were all these different kinds of affinity groups. So I'm in favor of these affinity groups. I think it's pretty disappointing to see them go away. I just went back to my MIT reunion, and it wasn't just the minority affinity groups that were getting defunded. It was also like some of the quirkier groups, like the hackers, were starting to get kind of suppressed too.
Mm.
And I think that's kind of a shame. I think that like diversity doesn't mean everybody I think the point of diversity is to have a lot of different groups that have different perspectives, and you kind of need those groups to pair off with and talk amongst themselves and then come back together and share what they've learned. If you just kind of flatten everything, then I think that a lot is lost.
Well, I mean, you describe your efforts to get promoted and so forth, and it seems like there's a lot of different types of bosses, and some of them are you talk about these folks that had zero tolerance for bullshit, and I think that's probably a virtue. That's probably a good thing. But you also talk about some of these people at work that are just plain jerks, right? And I've always wondered why it is that organizations continue to tolerate jerks. I mean, how is this possible? I mean, is it just that the jerks are really good at playing these games, and that's how they're able to you know, protect themselves in spite of their jerkiness? Like, is the jerkiness sort of a feature and not a bug?
I think so. I think the jerks are very good at using force at key moments to get what they want.
Mm,
And if you and like oftentimes like when you're up for a promotion, there's like only one shot to get that promotion. Or if there's a big project that you're working on, there's only one shot to present it to your superiors and get good feedback on it. And it's easy to get bullied out of those opportunities by other jerks. But the jerks I think are better at like playing like offensive defense and making sure that they are the ones that get promoted during promotion cycles, or they're the ones whose projects are allowed to shine. So I think that's one reason they are allowed to advance and persist. And also, yeah, they tend to get results. They tend to like
yeah.
kind of pressure their employees into getting them the results that they want, maybe working longer hours, or they might use more fear tactics to get what they want. But I think ultimately it's bad for organizations to tolerate that kind of behavior for too long because, again, if people are quitting all the time because their boss is overworking them, then in the long run, that's not good for the organization.
Yeah, so I mean, in a lot of what you're describing is how to play these games,
Mhm.
but a big part of it is also designing the rules of the game, right? And so oftentimes when you're lower down in the hierarchy, you don't get to choose the game,
Mhm.
but when you get higher up, you have the opportunity to kind of alter the rules of the game. And so one would think that if you recognized some dysfunctionality, right, at the lower level, then by the time you get to the senior level, you're like, I'm going to fix the game, right?
Mhm.
But it doesn't seem to happen that way.
Well, I think that oftentimes the people who succeed because they are good at navigating the existing structures. So why would they
Mm,
change the existing structures if that's like what was able if that's what enabled them to get where they are? Um, but I mean, at least in my own career, I really try to remember what it was like when I was a lowly entry level employee, and I try to treat the entry level employees with a lot of respect because I understand how hard it is to be in that position. So, um, yeah, I think it's possible to remember what it was like
mhm.
and try to make things fair and not so challenging for people in those positions.
Well, let's talk about the housing market because, we all, I mean, most of us are going to, at some point in our lives, be considering buying a home. And I've always been puzzled by this market. It seems so crazy. I mean, one of the things that's crazy about it is that, you oftentimes get maybe like a half hour to kind of look at a home that you're you're going to spend, years of your life in. And if you're going to buy a bed, you get a 30-day money back guarantee and you can, spend as much time in the store lying in the bed. So you get to actually spend more time testing out a bed than you do a house. I mean, why are these markets are so peculiar? And then, we have these bidding wars. We have these agents, some of whom don't seem to really do anything but capture rents. I mean, is this market one that is, I don't know, ready for some disruption?
I think we need disruption in the housing market. I mean, fundamentally, we have an undersupply of housing. We're short like 4 million homes according to Freddie Mac in terms of what we should have been building versus what how many households have been formed. Right now, at this moment, the housing market is just completely stuck because of the yo-yoing of interest rates. Interest rate or mortgage rates went down to 3% for a 30-year fixed mortgage during the pandemic, and now they're up to 7%, which makes it so much more expensive to buy a home, but prices are still high, so it's just really unaffordable if you're borrowing to buy a home. The rental market is a bit more affordable right now, so at least people have that alternative. They don't have to buy. There isn't much price pressure on rents right now, but that will probably change in the next couple of years. There was a lot of building that happened during the pandemic that is just winding down now, and we're probably going to start to feel that supply crunch again. And then at the same time, there are new challenges like climate change is making insurance costs skyrocket in places like Florida and the Gulf.
And where I live,
Yeah, in
California, yeah.
California too. So, yeah, I think we definitely need some big interventions in the housing market. We've seen a lot of policy changes in California, which if California alone fixed its housing problems, it would probably fix housing problems for the entire country. Because if you go to other places like Seattle or Florida or Arizona or Nevada, they're all talking about all the Californians that are moving in because they've been priced out of living in California. But California's problems, I think, are deeper than just zoning. They have Prop 13, which gives a much lower property tax rate to existing homeowners, which means that they stay in their homes much longer because they get that tax benefit. And that means that even if you change all the zoning laws, you're probably not going to get that much more housing if nobody's selling their single family homes in those prime locations. So, yeah, I think there's a lot that we could do to make housing better than what it is right now because it is pretty dire.
So, I mean, how do we explain the whole notion of, these bidding wars? Because it seems like, when I was growing up, um, you could apply to like 2 or 3 colleges and you'd be, you know, comfortably confident you get into something. Now you have to apply to like 50 colleges. And so when you have like people applying to 50 colleges, the percentage of admissions is gonna have to go down, sort of tautologically.
Mhm.
And so it seems like, on any one of these houses, you might have like 20, 30 people submitting bids, which means that you're gonna have very low success rate. So is there an explanation for that? Because I don't think it was like that 20, 30 years ago, right? Where you would have, all of these bids and you'd have to make an offer on like 30 houses before you finally got one.
That was very common in 2021 and 2022 housing markets that homes would get, like, dozens of offers and go for hundreds or $100,000 above asking price, and that was because of how much interest rates dropped during the pandemic because the Fed
But I
had
mean,
to.
is that can only be because the asking price is, below the market value, right?
Yes, yes. So the market basically what happened was that interest rates dropped, all these new buyers flooded into the market, but not many new sellers reacted. And sellers didn't know where the ceiling was for prices. So a lot of times when you don't know how much a home is going to sell for, the strategy is to price low and then instigate a bidding war so you can discover the true market price, which is what happened in a lot of these places like Austin, Boise, all across the country. We had bidding wars when previously you only really saw those in California. Now, because interest rates are much higher, bidding wars are pretty much gone. I just was talking to a reporter today about how there's a record or not a record, the lowest share of homes selling for above asking price since 2020 is what we recorded this last month. So it's more actually in buyer's market territory right now because of how high interest rates are. But that would quickly change if interest rates were to drop. We would probably see a reignition of bidding wars. But That's what we normally have. Like, buyers, they set the prices because they're the ones actually, like, putting their money down. And sellers, they don't really know what their home's going to sell for. When the market is slowing down, they tend to price too high, and then the home sits there on the market for a very long time with 0 offers. But then when the market's heating up, they also don't respond by raising their prices. They just keep the price where it's at, and then if there's a bidding war, great, they get a price for above the asking price.
So what is the deal with the asking price? I mean, people are always kind of reading into it, and when you're a seller, you want to set it strategically. It's it's kind of a mystery from an economics perspective. Why sometimes the asking prices are well below market value, sometimes they're kind of well calibrated. I don't really understand it, and I don't understand what we should take away from it because presumably your willingness to pay is your willingness to pay, right? And it shouldn't depend on the asking price.
Well, one practical feature of the asking price is that when you go on a website like Redfin to buy a home, you're probably filtering on asking price. So you're not going to bother seeing homes that are priced way above your budget or way below your budget. And then I think that there maybe sociologists have something to say about this because there's like cultural norms that appear in different markets. Like in Florida, it's very common to price above what the ultimate sale price will
Mhm.
be. And everybody knows that sellers price above what the sale price will be, so all the buyers and agents know to come in under asking price. Whereas in the Bay Area in California, the norm is to price well below what the home is going to sell for. And again, all the agents know this, all the buyers know this, so they kind of internalize like if a home is priced for $1 million, it's probably going to sell for $1.2 million at the end of the day. So yeah, I think it's a reference point. It's a way for people to kind of navigate which homes are probably within their budget, but it's definitely not the end all be all.
Now, another thing that's puzzling is that, as a buyer, you would compensate your agent as a function of what you pay. I mean, this seems to be a perverse incentive, right? So the buyer's agent is going to try to, make you spend more because they make more money when you spend more. I mean, why do we still have this kind of perverse incentive?
Well, it used to be the rule that the seller would pay both the buyer's agent and the seller's agent, even though the buyer's agent technically works for the buyer, they were getting paid by the seller. And there was a big federal court case that changed that rule. So now buyer's agents have to have a contract with their buyer before they even go on a tour that like dictates how they will be paid. So, but what's interesting is that even though that rule change happened and now it's very clear that the buyers are the ones who dictate how the buyer's agents are being paid, they still default to the old system of, well, I'll pay you some percentage of the home I buy and I'll ask the seller to pay for it. Even though they're not obligated to pay for it, I'll put in the offer, I'll ask for them to pay for it. So people are still defaulting to the old ways. That might be because it's only been a year since that rule change went into place, and it's a very slow market right now, like with very few transactions, and it's more of a buyer's market than a seller's market. So sellers are saying yes when they're asked by the buyer to pay for the buyer's agent fee. It'll be interesting to see when the market starts to heat up again, if it shifts more into a buyer's market, if we see more more innovation in how buyers agents are paid. We might see more flat fees. We might see more pay for service. Like I'll pay you for the
Mm.
number of tours I go on. I'll pay you for the contract. I'll pay you for like these different steps in the process. But so far, we haven't seen that broadly in the market. And I think that might be status quo bias. I think it might be because people are just afraid of navigating buying a home. They don't want to do something unusual because they've never done it before and it just feels safer to do things the way that they've always been done. But I wouldn't be surprised if 5 years from now, we do see a shift in how buyers agents are paid.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a couple alternatives. I mean, all of them seem to be potentially problematic, right? If you pay per visit, I mean, they're just going to show you everything, right? What do you think would be a kind of plausible new norm for buyer agents?
So, yeah, I don't know if there's a perfect one size fits all solution. I think what we'll probably see is more tailored solutions. If you're a
Mm.
buyer and you're already going to pay all cash, then you have no problem paying your agent directly. And I think there we'd probably see more of those people who have lots of cash paying a flat fee. But if you don't have the money to pay your buyer's agent, you need to rely on a mortgage to buy the home. And you don't have the money up front for your agent, then you're probably still going to need to ask the seller to pay. And if you're asking the seller to pay, then a percentage kind of makes sense. But it's still not like it doesn't need to be a percentage. So maybe we'll see
Mhm.
more agents just offering a flat service. It's interesting because when you get up into the luxury end of the market, the percentages start to drop, which kind of tells
Mm.
you that these agents understand that, like, just because it's a $5 million home, they don't deserve
They don't do
3%
any
of a
more
$5
work.
million
Yeah.
home. They're not doing any more work, so they start to compete with one another, and those percentages tend to drop. Uh, so yeah, you probably see more of that, where if you're a big spender, you can afford to pay in cash, and then once you pay in cash, you can probably afford to negotiate down to still a large cash amount, but not the high percentage that it would have been.
Mhm. Now, when you sold your house in Seattle, you didn't, look at any of the letters that
Yeah,
you got
yeah.
from the buyer, and, I bought my house, I provided a letter, and I think it probably made a difference, I mean, it was a unique circumstance, but, I mean, this seems like everybody does this now. This is now a thing. This I don't know whether people did this 20 years ago. Did they?
I I think I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if people did it 20 years ago because people interacted more in person, so maybe they brought them a pie or
Yeah.
something, or shook their hand, or, like, you had more face-to-face interaction, but especially during the
Yeah.
pandemic, there was no face-to-face interaction, but I think buyers still wanted to put a face to the offer, especially
Mhm.
when they're competing against 12 other offers. But I don't know if we did an analysis of whether letters matter, and I think we found that they did matter a small amount, like, it increases your chances by, like, maybe 5%, and when it's, like, 2 equal offers. But I think most of the time, I mean, at least I would go with just the more money. Like, why would I give a gift to somebody of, like, thousands of dollars just for writing me a letter? It doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if there's some emotional attachment that you have, or your family was raised there, and it's already kind of psychologically difficult to give up on the home. Maybe this, I don't know, helps you to sleep easier at night, knowing that your prized possession is in good hands.
I think people have a lot of sentimental value attached to their home, and they like the idea of 20 years later, like, driving by it and pointing to it with their kids saying, like, "This is where you were born," or "This is where we used to live." But even if you sell it to a family and
Hmm.
that you think is gonna stay in it long term, they could just turn around and sell it to an investor the next year.
Hmm.
Like, it doesn't really
Yeah.
guarantee you anything in the long run. So, I don't know. I think, yeah, people get really sentimental about their homes and do kind of irrational things. I would put that in the category of irrational.
Yeah, I wonder if when you have these letters, there's more homophily, right, in the selling. So
Yeah,
you
that's what
sell
I
to,
caution against, like,
yeah.
because a lot of the times people prefer to sell to families, but then they have a very, yeah, homogenous idea of what a family is, a man and a woman with kids, and, like, they might be, like, yeah, or they wanna sell to somebody who's local. That's another big one, and that reinforces historical segregation if you're selling to somebody who's local.
Hmm. Yeah, and the other thing about these agents is that oftentimes they are, it's less about knowledge of the housing market and more about good personal interaction, right? I mean, I was surprised that when I bought my house, my buyer agent was remarkably unknowledgeable about how to get mortgages and how to do inspections and like all this stuff.
Oh,
But they
wow.
were, these wonderfully friendly people,
I would hope that our Redfin agents, are better than that. That's what I'm here for, to help our agents, be more knowledgeable about the housing market.
Hmm.
And actually, real estate is getting more and more vertically integrated. Redfin is being
Hmm.
acquired by Rocket Mortgage, so I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised if moving forward, the agents that are more successful are the ones that do have, like, more of an association with the whole entire process as opposed to just that one piece of being an agent.
I mean, have you been able to apply any of your insights around, the workforce and workplace to the um, kind of agents that are working at Redfin? Because it's, obviously these are not employees, but it would be really helpful, I guess, to understand like what makes for a good agent and, how productive they are and, how good they are at their job. I mean, do you have the opportunity to do that kind of research?
Yeah, I'm actually doing some research on that right now. So I don't have results just yet, but what's interesting about Redfin is that the agents are employees. They
Oh,
are
okay.
compensated based on performance. It used to be more of a flat, like a it used to be more of a mixed rate where there was, like, a flat compensation and then a piece rate on top of it. Now it's, like, 100% piece rate, but they do get benefits, like health benefits, retirement benefits. So they are employees, so that gives us the opportunity to do more research on
That's
that, so
unusual, right? In the real
yes,
estate.
we're pretty unique that way.
Yeah,
Usually agents are private, are, sole proprietors. They have their own business and they just hang their license at a brokerage, but
right.
Redfin employs them.
Now there was this big federal lawsuit, right? That is supposed to, you know, I don't know, make the MLS less important, and it's supposed to open up the door to, I don't know, disintermediated sales. I mean, but we haven't really seen that much change.
It's
Do you think
starting.
that yeah, and would that
Yeah.
make the agents less important, or would it just kind of change what it is that they do?
So what changed with this lawsuit that I was talking about before that changed the way that, agents are paid, how a buyer's agent needs to, like, have representation in a contract before they go and tour a home. That means that if you are unrepresented and you tour a home and you wanna make an offer, the easiest way to do that is to have the seller's agent be your agent too, and they call that co-representation,
Mhm.
I believe, which has its own incentive problems, right? If there's one agent that's negotiating both sides, it's
Yeah.
like, who do they really work for?
I used that approach when I bought my, apartment in North Carolina. I enlisted the seller's agent as my buyer agent, and she helped me get a much better deal.
Yeah, sometimes they help you get a better deal. They'll charge less sometimes to do that, because they don't have to go find you as a client and pay for, like, acquiring you as a client. But what's happening with that now is that there's just more of those pocket sales, they call them,
Mhm.
where if you need to kind of have an in order to make an offer on a home. You need to be represented by the seller's agent to even
Mm.
have a chance at getting an offer or be represented by an
It's
agent
almost
that's
like the
at the
art
same
market.
brokerage. Yeah,
It's more
right.
yeah, it's more like the art market.
Right, and, both Zillow and Redfin have been pushing back against that. It was Compass that was going down this road, and then Zillow said that they weren't gonna show any Compass listings that were engaging in this behavior, and Redfin followed suit. So there is kind of a fight happening right now about what the future of real estate is going to be. Is it going to be one where if you go on Zillow or Redfin, you see all the listings that are out there? Or is it going to be one where you have these kind of walled gardens where you see different listings on
Mm.
Compass than you would on Zillow than you would on Redfin, which I think would be worse from a user experience. I think people really take it for granted that when you go on these websites, you see every single home that is on the MLS that is for sale. And if the MLS went away, it would be more like finding an apartment. And if you've tried to find an apartment, you know how challenging that is. You have to like go look on Craigslist and go look on rent.com and go look on apartment lists and go look on all these different things. You don't even know if you're seeing all of them because sometimes you have to drive around and actually look
Mm.
at the signs that are advertised outside these apartment buildings to even know they have a vacancy. So I think the discovery costs could be a lot higher if we move to this more fragmented market.
Yeah. Now your competitor Zillow tried to get into the housing business by, buying and selling homes, and it was disastrous and it blew up. And, it seems like the kind of thing that an economist could have flagged right out of the gate. I mean, you have a whole section in there on asymmetric information and it's, lemons problems. I mean, as soon as I found out that they were going to use their estimates as a basis for, house trading, I was like, that's not gonna work, right? I mean, you're gonna get a huge adverse selection problem. I mean, couldn't an economist have kind of warned them that this is gonna cost them a couple $100 million?
Yeah. I mean, Redfin was engaging in this a bit, but at a much, much smaller scale. So, we were not immune from getting into this business. It was kind of one of those things where like all of our competitors were doing it and we were going to be behind if we didn't. But yes, it was working very well for these companies when home prices were going up because you could buy a home and by the time you went to sell it, it would already go up
Yeah.
in value.
So even if it was there was adverse selection, it would it's kinda like the subprime mortgage market, right?
Mhm,
In the early
mhm.
2000s. Yeah, there are tons of asymmetric information, but, the bubble is just gonna make up for all the mistakes.
Yes, and I remember questioning, well, what happens when the market goes down? And there was a thesis that if the market went down, sellers would still want to sell to these buyers, they called them institutional buyers, because they would be afraid of the market going down even more, and you'd be able to get like the price the home at a discount. I never really believed in that thesis, and but yeah, when the market did start to turn, that was when Zillow found it to be not profitable anymore. So they pulled out, and we pulled out too, but we had like a much smaller operation to pull out of. I think it makes sense sometimes to have that intermediary because selling a home is quite difficult and painful, especially if you're like in the middle of a crisis, like your spouse just died, or you're going through a divorce, or like you're in the military and you've been stationed somewhere else and you just don't have the ability to sell the home and do all the work that involves. It can make sense to sell to an intermediary.
They're like liquidity
hmm
providers.
Yes, they're
Yeah.
liquidity providers essentially. But yeah, I think if you don't have the pricing exactly right, then it's really easy to lose money in a market that's going down, and that's, I think, what happened to Zillow.
Now you have a whole section in the book on family and work and family and combining them. And when I teach game theory, I talk about how not only are your coworkers your frenemies, but your family members are your frenemies. Right? You didn't use the term frenemy, but it seems like we operate in completely different domains when we think about our work and we think about our family. But in practice, these are things that have to be decided jointly, right? Why is it that people don't think clearly about the trade-offs across these different domains in their lives?
I think it's hard to make trade-offs from, like, the love perspective to the money perspective because you can't,
Because
like,
they're
really put.
incommensurate. Is that the
Yeah,
idea?
yeah, like, you can't really put a dollar amount on the love aspect of it. But, one thing I talk about in the book is, like, all this evidence that shows that the money part matters because couples that have, positively correlated incomes, for example, they have higher divorce rates because when the market
Mm.
turns and both their incomes go down, that creates a lot of stress in the marriage, right? If neither partner is bringing in any money and you don't have as much money going into your household, then obviously that creates stress.
So if you're an IPO lawyer, you should marry a bankruptcy lawyer, basically.
Exactly, exactly, yeah. Another one is, like, geographic dispersion in careers, couples where at least one person has a career that could be done in any part of the country tend to stay together more than couples where each of them has a career that can only be done in, like, one city. Like, for example, I gave the example of, like, a nuclear engineer. There are only so many nuclear power plants in the country, or an actress. You can only really get acting gigs in Los Angeles and New York. So if you're an actor married to a nuclear engineer, it's going to be really tough for you to both have prosperous careers and decide where to live. And those couples do tend to have higher divorce rates. So I think it's important to understand where stress comes from in marriage because I think that's a lot of the times why couples end up in divorce is that they enter into these stressful situations that they weren't anticipating. They get into fights. They don't have a clear vision of like what the marriage is trying to produce, to put it in that Becarian sense of family economics, and things can fall apart. So I would definitely advise people to when they're getting married to think about their futures, their
Mhm.
financial futures, their career futures, and make sure that they're aligned. If they aren't aligned, come up with those compromises about like, well, whose career is going to get prioritized when did when should shifts happen where those career prioritizations change when it comes to kids, like who's going to be doing most of the, parenting or be the primary parent. I think it's a bit naive to say everything's gonna be 50-50 even, because even if it is 50-50 even, it's not gonna be 50-50 even at every single point in time. Like, you're gonna have to make some negotiations about who's doing what when, so it's good to have those talks ahead of time and to keep having them routinely.
Now, where do people learn this stuff? I mean, this is so important and so critical to success in life, but it seems like there's no kind of formal training that would help you to make better decisions in your personal life and work life. I mean, should we think about having courses in practical economics, right? Not just theoretical economics in our university education,
Yeah, they used to have home economics, right? I feel like you could just adopt
right?
that same terminology, but talk about, like, yeah, how do you do not just baking and sewing, but how do you plan for the economy of your household? And I know that there's a lot of
Mm.
research on this. Becker, like, laid the foundation for it. Emily Oster has a book called The Family Firm, so I'd recommend that to people who wanna learn more about how to think of your family in this business type sense. But, yeah, I think an entire course on it could be really valuable to undergraduates and even high school students.
I mean, that's the original meaning of the word economics, right? Managing
Yeah.
the household.
Mhm.
Yeah. Now, another thing in your book, you have a lot of examples from the animal kingdom, and
Yeah.
I love that because I also use a lot of examples from the animal kingdom, and I'm wondering when you were studying game theory and behavioral economics at Chicago, did they also use a lot of animal examples, or did you have to kind of range outside of economics to get access to all that?
No, it wasn't at U Chicago. It was at MIT. I took one class in neuroscience and cognitive science department, and it was on animal behavior. And
Stuck with you.
yeah, it stuck with me. It stuck with me because it was so similar to the economics courses that I was
Hmm.
taking, especially like those the hawk dove game, for example, all the bird examples. We learned about optimal foraging theory, which is exactly the same as utility theory. It's just
Yeah.
you're foraging for food instead of foraging for money in the economy. So yeah, that stuck with me. I love those examples. I find that when I'm talking to regular people and I'm trying to show them how important economics is, they kinda don't believe me that economics is real. They think economics is fake. I've heard that a lot from younger people, but they believe me more when I can show that even animals obey the laws of economics. And they're like, "Oh, then it must really be universal if animals do it." So that's why I used a lot of the animal examples because I found
Hmm.
that, yeah, when talking to people, they tend to resonate a lot more than talking about people.
Hmm. You also use a lot of examples from the world of music, and it sounds
Yes.
like that was one of your early passions.
Yeah, well, not just music. I mean, I use a lot of examples from Black American popular culture. And the reason I did that was because, well, I wanted to find new examples that hadn't been about before. And also, I wanted this book to resonate with people who might not see themselves in the world of
Hmm.
economics. Like so many times, the protagonists in our economic stories are homophilic, as you said, to the professors that are teaching them. So I wanted to just add some diversity in terms of the examples and make people feel like the characters in the book were characters that they could identify with.
Hmm. Now I want to end where we started, which is with the title of the book. Hate the game, right? And so, again, I mean, I feel like you should say "hate the game" slash "love the game." That should be the name of the book.
Well, the expression comes from "Don't hate the player, hate the game," which I think is the
Uh-huh.
main theme of the book. Like, just because the economy is unfair, and it's unfair for a whole host of reasons, it's not all, like, nefarious reasons, like, sometimes games are just, like, these inherent flaws in them, like the principal agent model, for example. It's not that the principal is bad or the agent is bad, it's just that they have different incentives, and that results in you know, some undesirable outcomes. But if you see that, you can navigate around it, and you don't have to hate yourself for trying to make it in this economy. You can just see the economy for what it is and its flaws and still try to excel at it. And then hopefully, once you are in a position where you are doing well in this economy, you can try to fight for changes or advocate for changes that will make it a more fun game, a more fair game for everyone to play.
Well, I think in 15, 20 years, there's going to be someone who's going to put out a book and they're going to say that they were inspired at
I
age
hope so.
17 by this book, just like you were with Steve Levitt's book. And it's going to bring a bunch of people to the world of economics. So thanks so much for writing this. Hate the
Thank
game.
you. Thank you for having me.
unSILOed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.